The Secrets of Star Wars is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall. I play Harrison Dula on Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to the Secrets of Star Wars podcast. May the Force be with you always.
You're listening to the Secrets of Star Wars, episode 67.
Hello there.
It's a power that Jedi have that lets them control people and make things float.
Impressive. Every word in that sentence was wrong.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
It's against my programming to impersonate a deity.
That's not how the Force works.
Force is with me, and I am with the Force, and I fear nothing.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Hey everyone, I'm Father Andrew Kinstetter, aka Father Fett, and you're listening to the Secrets of Star Wars, where we talk about everything connected to that galaxy far, far away, including the deeper themes and meanings. First of all, please be sure to share the podcast on your favorite social media platform and leave us a review and let us know how we're doing, because this also helps us to get our show seen by more people who would be interested in listening to our show. So please share the show and share the love of Star Wars and our faith. Today we are going to be continuing our series of character-devoted episodes, and tonight we are taking a deeper look at the Chosen One himself, Anakin Skywalker, and his dark side future self, Darth Vader. Joining me tonight on the panel are Andrew Hermes.
Hey, Father, how's it going?
It's going well. Second this evening is Angela Cialana.
Hey, so you had to open up the show with that can of worms, the Chosen One. Hello, everyone.
I didn't mention his midi-chlorian count, though.
Oh, no.
Sorry. And third and finally this evening is Mike Creevy. Hey, Mike.
What is thy bidding, my show host? So that sounds a little weird.
It's all good.
Just slightly.
So we are going to be talking about Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader this evening, and to just give our listeners an overview of the character, which I'm sure if you are a Star Wars fan at all, of course, you already know who this character is. But for those who would like a very brief overview, this is Anakin Skywalker. So Anakin Skywalker was born on Tatooine as a Vergence in the Force, so a nexus of the Force, essentially, and is the prophesied chosen one who would bring balance to the Force. He is the focal point in the prequel trilogy, as he is rescued from slavery by Qui-Gon Jinn through a wager in a pod race. He successfully helps Padme and the people of Naboo repel the Trade Federation off the planet. He's taught the ways of the Jedi as the Padawan of Obi-Wan Kenobi. He falls in love and secretly marries Padme Amidala as the Clone Wars begins, and he fights in the Clone Wars and even trains his own apprentice Ahsoka Tano during this time. At the conclusion of the Clone Wars, he is seduced by the dark side of the Force in his desire to prevent his wife, Padme, from dying, and joins Darth Sidious, Supreme Chancellor or Emperor Palpatine. Refer to episode 66 if you'd like to hear more about him. He joins him as his new apprentice, Darth Vader. As Vader, he enforced the rule of the Empire throughout the galaxy during the time of the original trilogy and attempts to convert young Luke Skywalker to the dark side. But ultimately, Luke, his son, redeems him by not killing him in anger and reawakens that part of Vader that is still good. Vader then saves Luke by throwing the Emperor Palpatine down a reactor shaft, but in the process is mortally wounded and dies, fulfilling his destiny as the Chosen One. So he is a hero, he is a villain, he is a interesting and complex character.
Yes.
So what makes him a good character? I'm not going to say what makes him a good hero or villain, but what makes him a good character is the question that we throw out first this evening.
It's a loaded question.
I was ready to answer a different question. I was ready to answer what makes him a good villain.
Oh, well,
and I was
then...
like, okay, I've got my notes.
Well, what makes him a good villain or character?
Well, to answer the character question, I think he's one of the few, maybe the only example of a character that's been a villain a trilogy and has been the protagonist of another trilogy, basically, in the prequels, until the very last act of the third film. So that just makes him unique. I mean, we have so much with the prequels and the animated series, along with the original trilogy. I mean, after the original trilogy, I mean, he was just obviously a villain, and he was amazing because with very little screen time and an expressionless, helmet, and an iconic voice, obviously.
Yes.
He was able to become one of the most iconic villains of all time. But then learning more about his character through the lore of Star Wars, we have all this backstory and all this, everything that led up to it. And then, no matter what your feelings are on the prequels, you can, and whether or not you've watched the animated series or not, I mean, there's so much out there on him. And he's such a fleshed out character that you're hard pressed to find any character in pop culture that has just so much material behind him, and that's really, I mean, really, some would argue the story is still being written on him. But I think after the sequel trilogy and after Rogue One, it's a good capstone, for such a character. I mean, what a amazing IP for Disney to have, that character, and for Star Wars to have had for all those years, Lucasfilm. So it's really, we could go on and on about it, and we will throughout this podcast, but I mean, it'll be hard to find a character like him.
I have to say that I'm one of those people that's different from everybody else who is like a super nerded out Star Wars fan. I don't know, you tell me, but I really wasn't interested in Anakin except for the animated series. The Clone Wars really, for me, made me more interested in and empathetic towards Anakin, because I saw the prequels when I was pretty young. And, I was, of course, interested in Darth Vader because he's this really mysterious, figure in my favorite Star Wars movies. But as far as, I think if I had started with the prequels and then watched them in numerical order, the movies, I don't know if I would have been so invested in Anakin, really. One of the things that I appreciate about the animated series is that I get to spend more time with Anakin, and I get to understand what just makes him a person, like, really somebody that I can relate to more, and I can see myself interacting with just as a human being. So, that for me, that's what is interesting for me in terms of the content that's around Anakin, even though there's so much that, you can pull from.
Yeah, I was just thinking to totally steal, borrow maybe is a better word, from a theme that philosophy of religion guru is a wrong word too, but Peter Kraft, from Boston College, a lot of our listeners will know of. He has a great theme he kind of follows, and he's approaching it more from the standpoint of how it shows up in C.S. Lewis, really in Lewis's own life, but also in a lot of his works. But the phrase popped in my head as soon as Father asked this question. It was that this character is simultaneously completely fated and free the whole way through the story. Fated and free. Fated in that it's just, there's like this destiny where, I mean, when you look at it, it's like everything that happens is like meant to happen. It's like almost like it's completely out of his control. Like he's always gonna be Darth Vader. And then he's always gonna be redeemed, and that it's all part of a clear, bigger picture that's way beyond anybody's reach, but that everything he does is his own free choice. Every single dominant, like he didn't have to do that. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to do that. Like every single choice he makes, just like all of us. And that's, I think the key point that really comes to my mind is that's true for every one of us. Not that anybody's destined to do evil, and none of us is ever supposed to do evil, and we can avoid it with God's grace. But that he's already included into his redemptive plan the worst of anything you could possibly ever do, And so that's just, I think when you see that in a story, and it's just right. And that's hard to do, like it's hard to write that, I'm sure. And it doesn't always work. Even in Star Wars, there's some characters where it's like, well, yeah, okay. Even if you love it. But yeah, that's for him. I think he just, for me, he's the one who maybe most sort of embodies that very human reality.
Yeah. My answer to the question is I think his humanity makes him a good character. I could echo just about everything that you guys have been saying. I grew up actually with the prequels, and I was interested less in Anakin Skywalker in the prequels, except for the lightsaber battles, and I was interested more in the other people. And if you watch the prequels again, especially as I'm now, quite a bit older than when I first saw them in theaters, yeah, they're rough, So I think the key is you should watch, if you want to know Anakin on a deeper level, you should watch the movies, but also the Clone Wars animated series, because I think that's exactly where his character, his humanity is fleshed out in a little bit better way. In his defense, though, at least in Attack of the Clones, he is 19. So not to say that's an excuse, but I can at least sort of look beyond some of the rough dialogue there. But yeah, he is a character who ultimately he wants to do the right thing, but he often does the wrong thing in pursuit of what is the right thing. So of course his key downfall in Revenge of the Sith is he just wants to save Padme's life, which is a noble cause. It's a good thing, but he chooses the evil means to try to accomplish that, and then of course inadvertently kills her in the process. And one of the things that I found when I was kind of doing some research online too is a correlation to the Greek tragic hero trope, which was a really interesting thing for me to kind of sit with. And basically, this is according to Aristotle, a tragic hero can be defined as, quote, a great man who is neither a paragon of virtue and justice, nor undergoes the change to misfortune because of any real badness or wickedness, but because of some mistake, unquote. And so to kind of look at Anakin as the embodiment of the Greek tragic hero, like he's a great man, but he's not necessarily the paragon of virtue or justice. I think we might sort of say that Obi-Wan would maybe be more in line with that, or Yoda. But he does undergo a change, but not because of like inherent evil within himself, as opposed to say maybe Palpatine, if we wanted to kind of go down that road, but because of some mistake. And his mistake is choosing the evil means in pursuit of a good, and inadvertently causes all this, the bad things to happen. And he goes off and, he kills all the younglings in the Jedi Temple in pursuit of saving Padme and thinking that he has to do this in order to save her. And it's those choices, so yes, kind of the fated and free sort of thing. It's those choices that he makes that sends him into the dark side. And then he has to live with those consequences, the death of Padme, the mutilation that he experiences on Mustafar, and then has to live with the respirator and the mask and the suit, as a consequence of his choices. But then also he's still human. And then at the end of Return of the Jedi, is able to reconnect with that and be redeemed, which I think is crucial in the human story and the relatability. And it's a complex character, but a really, really good character, and shows us what happens to someone who does the wrong things for the right, or does wrong for the right reasons. Is that how I want to say that?
Yeah, I agree with you on, many levels on that particular point, but also, we see Anakin is arrogant, and he's accused of being that a few times. He's very determined, but he's also, that comes off in being headstrong and arrogant. And he has this desire to control, and I think that is a very human, quality or situation that we can find ourselves in when we want to have control over things that are not pleasing to us. But, so he isn't this perfect person. He isn't simply killing the younglings, I don't think, just because he thinks that's his only option. I do think there's just a lot of pent up anger and frustration and loss and trauma like inside of him that is never resolved, partially at the fault of just the Jedi training methods and the philosophies that they have. But also, I think that's just part of his character. It's just part of his personality. He really holds on to those things. And we talk about attachments a lot when we talk about Anakin. And one positive quality about him is that he really loves people. The people that are close to him, he really, really defends fiercely. The droids that he loves are, he will do anything for them. We see that throughout the movies as well as the animated series. But, that really gets turned on its head when it comes to having to learn to accept certain things that happen in life that you don't have control over. He just can't come to learn that lesson. And ultimately that's what is his downfall, right? So I think, that he is very much what you're describing, the Greek tragic hero. But I, at first when I was reflecting on Anakin, I was like, oh, well, he was just kind of caught, ran out of options, right? And I think we talked about that on the last episode with Palpatine, that he felt like he didn't have any other options, so he just had to make a deal with the devil, But I think part of it was also just the fact that he didn't develop himself in virtue, and when you do that, then you're able to resist temptation.
Yeah, I one of the key points, if you've watched the Disney Gallery of The Mandalorian, episode 2 from the first season, I think is crucially important here too, because Dave Filoni is a brilliant man who is able to kind of tell the entire 6-movie Skywalker saga in just a few minutes and Anakin's story. And one of the key points that he makes there is that he's talking about the duel of the fates with the battle between Darth Maul and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. And he talks about the duel of the fates as the duel of the fates is actually they're fighting for the fate of Anakin. And Filoni makes the point that Qui-Gon is the father that Anakin needs, and that Qui-Gon recognizes that the Jedi are meant to care and to love, and that's not a bad thing. And even Qui-Gon recognizes that the Jedi at that time are too detached and too political, and they've lost their way. And so that battle is really about the battle for Anakin. And so Qui-Gon is fighting for that. And when Qui-Gon dies, then Anakin is left with Obi-Wan, who initially looks at Anakin with sort of, who's this random tag-along character.
Up another pathetic life form.
Right. rather than a father figure. So Obi-Wan, of course, becomes his brother, but he never was a father figure for Anakin. And that, I think, is just super important, because Anakin, he had his mother. He was attached to his mother, and then he loses, he's taken away from Tatooine, so he has to say goodbye to his mother. But then he also loses the brief father figure that he had, and then doesn't have a father to help him learn how to be a good man, to grow in virtue, to do all those sorts of things. He learns the Jedi way, but he needed a father.
I think that's what Palpatine kind of sets himself up to be for Anakin. Mm-hmm. And, vacuum. it demanded that there be a father figure in his life, and he found that, but it just wasn't the right choice.
Right. Well, and even you see that in episode 1, even at the end of episode 1, Palpatine is already like, we're going to look at you with your career and your future with great interest. And so he's already kind of trying to be that father figure manipulator, not an authentic father figure, but
there's that line too. Is it in episode 2 or 3 where he's really schmoozing? He's like, I need your help, son. And it's like, oh, like calling him that. And that's, I mean, sometimes I say that to my students, which just because I'm getting old, I guess it's just natural, but not in a manipulative Dark Lord of the Sith sort of way.
Gee,
that's different. Yeah, no, it's different.
Yeah. And a theory that I've seen, many times, that's been said about Star Wars and his character is that, after Qui-Gon dies, obviously his destiny was, or his fate was, chosen to go towards the dark side and become Darth Vader. But there's like a theory that had to be part of the plan, because part of bringing balance to the Force was wiping out the Jedi, most of them, because the Jedi at the time, again, they didn't know what to do with him. Qui-Gon was the only person that knew what to do with him. Once he was out of the picture, the only way that it could it had to happen the way it happened. He had to wipe out almost all the Jedi and then ultimately kills Palpatine to truly bring balance for 30 some odd years. But yeah, that's I mean, it's an interesting way to look at it. I mean, because it brings a new perspective to, Order 66 and to his character, and it's kind of like, it makes it even more tragic. Is like he had to be, this sort of villain to ultimately bring the greater good in the end. So I just thought that just reminded me of an interesting thing that I've always, I don't know if I completely agree with that, but you have to wonder, is like, if you think about the Jedi, they were full of hubris and just all they cared about was, having meetings and councils and, Yoda and Mace Windu just like telling other Jedi, hey, go off and do this and that. How long could have that lasted without it maybe, being really, really bad for them in the long run?
You raised some really interesting points, because the Jedi definitely had lost their way by that point. They were definitely, I mean, way too political and detached in a bad sense, like, devoid of emotion, and and that's not healthy at all either, and even in participating in the Clone Wars, they were, I mean, I don't know, you could argue either way, whether that was for the benefit of the galaxy or if they were, participating in killing the Separatists. That's not really a good thing either. And you raise an interesting ethical philosophy there too, is do the ends justify the means? And not that Vader or Anakin would have been thinking, I have to do this in order to bring about the greater good, but that's kind of the idea there, is like, burning the entire forest to let the new force grow. Even though from a Catholic point of view, that's never good. You never do evil in order for good to come of it. But it's an interesting way to look at the Anakin Vader story arc, for sure.
Well, even so this is like just a slight spoiler for a few seconds here. If you haven't seen the animated series, but in the Clone Wars, there's this really famous 3 episode arc called the Mortis arc, or the Mortis trilogy. And in that trilogy, essentially it is told to Anakin, you are the chosen one, and it's sort of like proven by a test that he's the chosen one. And there's, I think, like once each episode, even, like they kind of reinforce that concept. And in the last one, he's shown what he will do in the future, and what his destiny is, right? And he's told, well, you don't necessarily have to do that. It's your choice. His memory is erased at the end of that episode of actually having seen what, comes in his future, but ultimately it comes to pass. So yeah, I do wonder what was up with that, when they were writing that. Was that their theory, that it had to happen? But ultimately, I do think that the writers of the various Star Wars content do emphasize the free will aspect. And, it is very much clear that Anakin did have a choice, right? He did have a choice, first of all, to marry Padme or not marry Padme, which, come on, y'all, like, where was that going to go? How was that going to be good for either of them?
A secret marriage. So good to do. Don't do that.
Just constantly lie to everyone you know about your living situation. So, that was one thing. But then, having children and that marriage and having to hide them and just all, the whole, it was his choice. Ultimately, I think it is the tragedy of not having a father. It is the tragedy of not having a good father figure in his life, a good mentor, and ultimately what are the wiles, that are out there that tempt us to do what we want to do. I think ultimately that's the whole point of Star Wars, right? It's constantly emphasized over and over again in many different scenarios.
As you were talking, I couldn't help but think of, just like that's kind of in the same way of we talk about divine providence, that, God doesn't do evil, or he doesn't want evil, but he allows it, and then he brings good forth from it. And so as you were talking about how maybe Vader had to do these things, all I could think about was the Exultet at the Easter Vigil, where we talk about the fall of Adam and Eve, who were free in their choice, but in the Exultet, that Easter proclamation, I'm going to read just a couple lines from it because it really just struck out for me. The priest or the deacon will chant this and say, "O truly necessary sin of Adam, destroyed completely by the death of Christ, O happy fault that earned so great, so glorious a Redeemer." And so we recognize, too, that in God's providence, he allowed Adam and Eve to fall. But because of that, he had already in place the plan for the Redeemer, Jesus, to come and to save us from our sins. So I'm not comparing.
There's a comparison. It's legitimate.
Anakin's not the Jesus figure here, I guess, but he would be the Adam figure who, creates the fault. But it does allow for good to be drawn from it ultimately later on, which is definitely what happens at the end of Return of the Jedi.
Can you imagine if they retitled Episode 3 Felix Culpa? They have people like, who's that guy? I'm like, no, Felix. That's a deep cut. Yeah, it's Revenge of the Sith. They're like, oh man, no, that's right on.
Well, yeah, that's the hardest question. Basically in theology and philosophy to answer is how do we have free will, but at the same time, how does God, know what's going to happen? Or, we can go on, we can go around in circles on that one.
Well, what's funny is you see it though. You see, like when you watch movies or read good books, it's like we know it's there. It's when it's happening to you. I think
exactly.
And it's like, no, it's not. It's like, well, yeah, that's faith, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's why we love stories so much, and that's why we love Star Wars so much. Is it deals with these kind of deep issues. We're sort of talking about the problem of evil, of why do bad things happen to good people, or why do people choose to do evil, or all of those sorts of questions. We throw all of those deep questions, identity, free will, divine providence, all of those things, and we throw them into a sandbox, and then we label them as Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader and all the Star Wars characters, and we play it out because we're trying to understand our own lives and how God is relating to us, and where do I fit in with is it really better to do something bad, hoping that and thinking that good is going to come from it, or is that really a bad idea? And so when we see these things play out in Star Wars, they help us just to understand our own lives better, and morality better, and virtue better, and suffering, and all the important questions. That's what Star Wars is all about on a fundamental level, and really any good story for sure.
I have legitimate question about Anakin. So we've talked about why he wanted to be a Sith, but it's been a while since I've watched episode 1, like maybe a few months. But why did he want to be a Jedi? Was it just because somebody told him, hey, you've got these powers and there's this way of living that, you know, there's these people that know what to do with those powers? Or like, what? Why did he want to be?
It's interesting you asked that, because I was just thinking about that a while back, and I'm this isn't so much an answer as more like a bullet point under that question, because he says, you know, the famous, like, I saw your laser sword, only a Jedi has a weapon like that, you know, like, thanks George, you got to get that in there, you know. And of course, as we all know, it wasn't done. It's shown up many other times, but yeah, he knows about the Jedi, like he thinks they're cool. but then the next time it comes up is like when the offer's been extended and he's like, I want to do it, you know, it's what I've always dreamed of, and you're like, okay. Yeah. So that's a good question, because maybe I'm missing something, but that I do seem to remember there's a little bit of a like, why wouldn't he want to do it kind of thing, but it does kind of pop out of nowhere. Exactly. There's not a whole lot of like, I dreamed about this, until he actually just says it.
I think a lot of it may be more subtext. So he's a slave. Okay.
Right.
And he makes comments about wanting to come back and free all the slaves. And so, I mean, I think he has this desire of liberation for himself and for his friends, but ultimately for all people. So maybe he has these desires to do good on a big scale. But then I also think he has a desire for adventure. At one point, he makes the comment to Qui-Gon that he wants to be the first one to see them all the stars and all the planets. You know, so maybe it's a combination of the two, and if he's a Jedi, he would have that opportunity to go on this adventure. So maybe not completely altruistic in his thoughts, but somewhat altruistic.
By the way, well, no, sorry, I'm tempted to turn this. I don't know if we want to turn this into a Q&A with Father or just keep putting him on the spot, but no, it does relate a little to what you just said, and this might be a topic for another time, but I'm just curious because I know it's been mentioned before in a previous show about the cool stuff coming up in some of these, some of the novels and some of the other literature about the Chiss having force-sensitive kids who are basically their navigators, who utilize the Force to navigate their ships because of the chaos. And they're called Skywalkers. Yeah. Is there... I'm sorry if we've already brought this up, but now I'm just wondering, like, with his interest in, you know, adventure and of course, like his flying capability, I just don't know. Like, do you know if there's any plan, or do you suspect there's any plan to actually make that connection or some kind of, because like, why is he named that? You know, he's like, his mom's last name is Skywalker. You know what I mean? Because he doesn't have he doesn't have a father. So why is she called Skywalker? I don't know. It's just, I don't know. It seems like something you wouldn't just leave that open, or I mean, you didn't have to call the Chiss kids Skywalkers. There has to be a reason they're doing that.
I've wondered that too. I've sort of chalked it up to just coincidence, because the Chiss are out in the unknown regions. So it'd be hard to see how that would connect with Shmi's ancestors.
Right. And she's not Chiss, you know. Yeah.
Right. However, there is still 2 more books coming in the Chiss Ascendancy trilogy. So the second one is coming this spring sometime. And I mean, knowing Timothy Zahn and his writing, he could have planted that name in an earlier book with the intention of kind of the hook line and getting the opportunity to flesh that out in another story down the road, because that's how writers get sequels, is they'll plant something that they won't pay off in the one book, but then they'll get to write it out in the next book. So I really wouldn't be surprised at all if there is a connection. Right now, I'm sort of there's a strong correlation, I guess, in maybe Anakin's desire to travel and pilot with the Skywalkers and the Chiss, but
like, you know how in our real world history, there's so many instances of slaves, like slaveholders having relationships with slaves. So I don't know if there's any like remote, maybe like, you know, very remote heritage, you know, of how long has Shmi's family been enslaved, or
or their ancestors could have encountered the Skywalkers, and or maybe an orphan encountered the Skywalkers and liked the name, or I mean there could be, or they're like Rey and are denouncing their Palpatine ancestry and taking on that name for some connection. So I guess it's at this point it's sort of a stay tuned sort of thing. But I think you're right that you wouldn't have just Skywalkers without it having some connection to the big Skywalkers of the whole story. But
and the idea that that kind of imagery, like the word itself makes sense then, like in their context, like the Skywalker, the one who's navigating it. Like, why would you like that famous name, like the most famous name in all of Star Wars, that now it doesn't make sense to have it primarily make the most sense in a context that was just introduced randomly, I don't know. That was just a thought. Of course, now that being said, originally his last name was supposed to be Starkiller, but that's a whole other Starkiller base. That's what a stupid,
right.
Well, that Lego special keeps coming up.
The gift
there
that
was
keeps
some
on
great
giving.
The great Vader content in that.
So absolutely.
The poor neglected Vader.
Yeah.
Palpatine, who was supposed to be his father figure, just. Anyways,
that's good.
We have a whole podcast on that.
We do. Right, that's right. Go back and listen to our Christmas special.
Oh my.
I guess let's talk about Vader for just a little bit. I know we talk quite a bit about just Anakin, and of course that's we have to, because that's how Vader is born. But what do you think of Vader as a villain? And I mean, of course it's perhaps you view, or perhaps people would view him differently when they first saw him in 1977 versus then seeing the prequels and knowing the backstory. But he is definitely one of the iconic villains of all time. So he succeeds in that. And what do you guys think he did good? How well was he a villain, I guess maybe is the better question.
I think he's as good as you could be. He had the whole package. I mean, you talk about Vader as a villain. You had obviously the costume, the helmet. I wasn't alive when Star Wars first came out at the time, but it's a costume that has, stood the test of time. And I can only imagine the initial impact of seeing it in the theater in 1977, because it still lands quite an impact now. I mean, now it's such a part of pop culture that, it's a symbol. You see a Darth Vader helmet, you know what that represents. Factor that in with, James Earl Jones's voice. Again, I mean, the voice of CNN and the voice of Darth Vader and the voice of Simba's father, Mufasa.
That's right.
But yeah, before he was, those things, he was Darth Vader. And obviously the imposing stature of, I'm forgetting his name. He recently passed.
Dave Prowse.
Yeah, and the Imperial March. I mean, the soundtrack, everything. I mean, it's really all you could ask for for an entrance. Because for someone where we cannot see his face, he's expressionless, he's monotone, we don't know what he's thinking. All those have to really be on point for it to work, or it could be a complete disaster. And again, I mean, if you look back in history, originally I think they used someone else's voice, or they used
they had Dave Prowse do all the lines. You can see it on YouTube, which is pretty
right.
funny.
He was doing the lines himself. That's right.
And he didn't know that they were gonna edit in James Earl. And James Earl Jones has been very gracious over the years, and he's always said that his attitude is always that James Earl Jones was a special effect. And he always described, he said, Darth Vader is Dave Prowse, and has been very gracious about that.
So yeah, again, I mean, could you imagine if if the voice was like someone else's, or didn't work, or more high pitched, or more corny? Because it's really not a typical, villain voice, other than he has a really deep voice. It's not that menacing. It's not like he doesn't have Palpatine's voice. Mm-hmm. It's not as,
it's not like a cackle or
right. Exactly. And really until Rogue One, we don't see him really at his full strength as far as what he could do. with like 10 minutes of screen time in the first film, I think, to show up like that and to just have like these very broad strokes of who he is with very, I mean, really, what was his motivation? Like just power, wanting more power. And not until the end of the second film do we find out he's Luke's father, you know, and we get a little bit more of what his connection is to our protagonist. Yeah, to have that sort of impact in such a short amount of screen time. I mean, you think of like the other really iconic villains in film, like the Joker in The Dark Knight. I mean, that's a 2.5-hour movie. He's in it for like, I think 20 minutes. But his presence is felt throughout the whole film. So you think of characters like that, where again we barely knew anything about him, and that's part of what made him so menacing. And it was that mystery. And then with all the stuff, when all the Anakin stuff came years later, with everything we just talked about, that just added to it. But the villain aspect of him, I think you put all those pieces together, it was just a match made in heaven or hell, I guess.
I would just want to echo the when you said about the stature, because I was checking this right before you said that, because I was thinking, you know, he passed away in the last year or so, I think, Dave Prowse, and he was
very recently,
6'6", and 6'6", you know, that's I would assume probably without the suit on too, which probably adds a little bit. So this imposing just figure, and Andrew, I'm sure you know the name for the technique, but the technique, you know, where you kind of film up to give the appearance of even greater stature, which they did, by the way, brilliantly with, for example, like Tom Hardy's only like, I think Tom Hardy's like 3 or 4 inches shorter than Christian Bale, but he looks really short, so big in The Dark Knight. Like he looks so big and scary, and so to do that with Vader, who's already like, you don't need to do that.
Ironically, it's called the hero angle, isn't it?
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
But that
it is
just,
actually
that, you know, that you create this added level of, you know, and knowing that you have such an audience of kids, you know, but it's not an inappropriate kind. It's not like you're going to have nightmares about Darth Vader. You know, you're going to have nightmares about Freddy Krueger, but not like Darth Vader somehow, because somehow there's a little bit of humor peppered in with it. You know, there's this cold kind of, you know, and like Andrew said too, like as much as we love that Rogue One scene, I think what made it great was 40 years of not having it and just imagining it. And then you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's it. You know, because in the first movie, it's like, you know, you see him in the hallway, chokes a dude and throws him, but that's just physical choking, which is scary enough because he's really strong. Okay. And then, because at that point you don't know anything about the mysticism and the Force and all that, Obi-Wan talks to Luke about the Force, but you're like, okay. And then Obi-Wan, like, you don't need to see his identification. You're like, oh, cool. It's like, it's kind of like magic, you know, like, you know, so like the Force, like if you really just go back and watch A New Hope, it's like the Force is like this slow kind of thing. And then the first time you see Vader use it, it's just the very, like, just strolling over and just totally Force choking Mahdi, you know, which is like, and it's so brilliant because it really is like, you have no idea what he's capable of. And that when you first see that, every time I see that scene, that's one of my favorite scenes. And of course, I put down quotable. He's so quotable, you know, all these decades, you know, and he'll never stop being quoted. But that, you know, I find your lack of faith disturbing, you know, like what a brilliant thing, you know. And then just, you know, Tarkin kind of like, you know, knock this off. Oh, okay, you know, and just never showing his full hand, never showing his full power. And then what's interesting is when you get to the prequels and all, you see the emotionalism and all that, which, you know, I sometimes make fun of the way it was portrayed, but I think it adds to it, in my opinion, it adds to the original trilogy because you see what he's controlling, you know, and he finally, you know, he's controlling it, right? Like Luke is always, with Yoda, like that struggle, you know, you got to learn how to control it. And then you see that Vader, as evil as he is controlling it. He's controlling it for stuff he shouldn't be using it for, but he's just so cold and calculating, and just people start running their mouth off and he just steps up and they're like, you know, like Krennic with him in Rogue One, like that, you know, Krennic's like, oh, blah, 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 yeah, I can't talk to you like that, you know, like just... Or like, you know, Vader with, I'll stop after this because it's, you know, but Vader with Lando, you know, perhaps you feel you're being treated unfairly. You're like, no, you know, just, you know, like that mean teacher that you just didn't want to mess with. Not that they would Force choke you. I'm just saying that there's that menacing kind of like someone's really using that power they've got, that presence, whatever you want to call it. So those are some of the notes I had.
So I have to laugh because you were talking about how Darth Vader he's not necessarily going to cause kids to have nightmares about him. If you go on YouTube and look for Star Wars as told by a 3-year-old, it is the most adorable video ever. And like this little girl is like she's just fantastic. And at one point she just kind of goes like all matter of factly. She's like, and don't talk back to Darth Vader because he'll get you. And like it's the most adorable thing ever. And side note to that little girl is a parishioner at one of the parishes here in Wyoming, and I've got to meet her. And she's probably a teenager by now, but I felt really, really silly because I was a deacon at the time, and I totally told her I was fanboying because I got to meet this YouTube sensation. But the way she talked about Darth Vader was just priceless. So go look that up on YouTube. She's absolutely adorable. So she's not scared of Darth Vader.
One of the things that Mike brought up was like humor kind of peppered here and there. And, this isn't maybe more of a Darth Vader thing, but definitely an Anakin thing is his sense of humor. I think he gets that from Obi-Wan. Like some of my favorite scenes are just, them in the elevator,
yes.
Whatever you call it in Star Wars. But I mean, just having a character who is so like his wit is so biting, and he's very sarcastic, just like Obi-Wan, and very brash. The clone troopers always talk about how memorable their adventures were with how did the General Skywalker. So that's one of my favorite things about Anakin is his sense of humor, and just how his arrogance can be very humorous.
Do you guys still cringe, by the way, every time at the beginning of episode 2 in the walking in the bar and Obi-Wan just says, "Why do I feel like you're going to be the death of me?" I'm like, that's a little cold. Like every time I see it, I'm like, that's too much. Come on. Spoiler alert for those of you who don't know, because he kills him. No, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I don't think we lost anybody on that one.
No. We've sort of transitioned, which is great, to kind of our favorite qualities. So thanks, Angela, for keeping us on track. I will say that my favorite quality of, and I'm going to say Anakin because I'm going back to pre-Vader, but I really appreciate his piloting skills. My favorite moment is the pod race. And like that was, as a kid, one of the coolest sequences in all of Star Wars.
Yep.
So to see him as a pilot then, and of course that just then is reinforced by how he is as a Jedi and his piloting skills as a Jedi, or in episode 2 when he like jumps out the window and attaches to that assassin droid, and then like is in a car or a speeder car chasing the Zamozel across the Coruscant skyline. And so there he did have a lot of fun, I think, in the prequel era, for sure. What about the rest of you guys? What are your favorite qualities and moments of Anakin?
Well, one of my favorite qualities also is his belief in the Force. Like, not just what he can do with the Force, but also like he really does believe in it. He really, obviously he believes that possibly, it can bring Padme back from the dead or keep her from dying. And of course, the line that you brought up, Mike, I find your lack of faith disturbing, but just, he's sort of like the ultimate believer in a way. And I think that sort of factors into maybe I think one of my favorite things about my favorite Star Wars movie, 6, is that throughout that movie, you see him sensing Luke's presence and sensing what is going on with Luke, and sort of like just really sensing things in the Force, and people sort of being like, okay, whatever, or that's weird, or just leave him alone, or questioning it. And he still pursues it. And I really like that about him, that no matter, how twisted his mind has gotten in a certain way, his heart and his mind, at the same time, he still has that really strong belief in the Force. So I like that.
By the way, that scene where you said about sensing, and I feel like I've connected with Andrew on this a couple times, but again, I never recommend it because it's not exactly family friendly, funny enough, but the Family Guy Star Wars, which is creative, but I love how they whiff on it when he's just like, when Han says to Chewie, I don't know, fly casual, and then the shuttle rears up and puts its hands in its pockets, and it's just walking very casually, and then Vader's looking out he goes, where is that casual looking shuttle going? The only thing I was going to add was so when I was in the Army, I was a master resilience trainer, which was basically they were getting each unit to try to have a certain amount of people trained in different sort of training blocks in positive psychology based kind of instruction to help with everything from PTSD to everything else. The idea of trying to have it as close to home, it's like a subsidiarity type thing for you Catholic listeners know what that means. Trying to address situations at the lowest level, the closest level to the problem. The home, the family, that kind of stuff. So in that Army situation, to try to have in-unit training for people struggling with stress and all that kind of stuff. And the reason I bring that up is resilience. It was right in the title there. And we would always teach from the get-go that the resilient person is not the person who never falls, but they're like a tennis ball, the person who bounces back. And with that serious introduction, I say something less serious now. He is resilient with pursuing Padme, because some of the stuff he says... I mean, look, it gave so much hope to someone like me who was kind of a hopeless romantic, because like to see this guy say to this beautiful girl, I don't like sand. It's coarse and irritating. It gets everywhere, and he keeps coming back,
Are you an
angel?
angel?
No, it's because I'm... I know. It's like, no, it's because I'm so in love with you. I'm like, dude, don't. Oh my gosh. But that was actually after they were married already. So it gave me hope. And that hope prevailed, thankfully. So, resilience, Anakin, absolutely.
Andrew, what about you? Any favorite qualities or moments?
There's obviously his redemption in Return of the Jedi, and everything that led up to it, and then again factoring in the whole storyline. After watching the animated series and the prequels, for better or worse, I mean, it just gives it so much more weight. And ultimately when he battles Obi-Wan, I mean, that scene still gives me chills, especially when Obi-Wan, yells out, "You were the chosen one." The tragedy of Anakin, that was like the moment. When I think of that character, I always go back to that scene and that line specifically. And yeah, I mean George Lucas really push that PG-13 rating with that was pretty graphic. I mean, they went pretty far with that. I was surprised, especially watching it as I got older. I'm like, man, how did they get away with this? The first two films were so like very kid friendly, but yeah, I guess that those two always stand out to me. And his qualities, I mean, we talked about it, a lot of it it's something I love about him and something I hate about him is this how he's just so insistent that he can do everything, and he can usually back it up, and when he's that's what I love too about Clone Wars is like whenever there's a situation where it's like, okay, what, like, no, Anakin, you can't do this by yourself, like, don't do it, like, this is dumb. He usually does it and it works out, and you hate him for it because it's it just brings out his pride, but you can tell he's compassionate when he does things like that. It's usually to he, like we mentioned earlier, he was all about liberating people, and he was all about doing the right thing when he was on the right side, and then ultimately he made the sacrifice play to bring balance in the end. So yeah, I think that those that's the quality I always look back to when it comes to his character.
Can I throw one short one in real quick that I forgot to mention? Was just the fight scene in Empire Strikes Back, which, I mean, that's, I've said before, and a lot of people I know that's their favorite movie. It tends to be mine. I've never done this, but I kind of want to now. I want to go back and watch the Rogue One hallway scene, and then the hallway scene at the end of the Empire, because the Empire Strikes Back fight scene, it basically has 3 phases to it, right? You've got the first part when they're carbon freeze chamber. Then the second part when they're in that little like that atrium area and Vader's just using the Force to throw stuff at him. And then the third one where he comes at him down the hallway. And when he comes at him down the hallway, and you've been away for a few minutes, it cuts back and it's quiet. Luke's that weather vane thing or whatever, and he walks in. And when he just comes out chopping at him, that's probably the closest thing to a Vader nightmare I might have had, because it's just at that point, like, he's not screwing around anymore. Like, he's actually kind of mad, and he's really coming at him pretty intensely, both hands on it, and just the style, like I love that. That's maybe my favorite lightsaber fight because of how it kind of amps up, and looking back on it, the emotional stakes of it, which we don't know yet, but I think it'd be interesting maybe to go back and watch that, because if anything, it helps, I think, give some more credence to Luke's abilities in that particular moment, knowing, as we do as fans, who he's dealing with, and the kinds of things that Vader's capable of. But that was just one I wanted to mention. That always gets me every time, like how that builds is just so well done and choreographed.
For our last segment here before we conclude, we're going to talk just briefly on lessons that we can learn from Anakin. So what lessons have you guys gleaned from him?
One of the things that I wrote down was heed the wisdom of your elders, but then I was like, except that one elder.
I need your help, son.
But he does kind of, again, with the arrogance thing, like he thinks that he can just, and also what you were talking about, Andrew, he thinks he can just find the answer to all the problems and do it himself. And he pushes Padme away a lot towards the end there. And, she's like, hey, this is a bad idea. What are you doing? And so, even Padme, just he ultimately chose himself. Mm-hmm. Right. And so to not allow yourself to be so cut off from your community, from the people that care about you and their opinions, sometimes you have to make certain choices that are very difficult, that you disagree with your family on. But ultimately, that shouldn't be just made on your own, period. You should get the advice and the counsel from people who are, maybe in the position that you're considering, from your spiritual directors, from your doctors, from your, grandparents, from whoever, but to not allow yourself to be so isolated that you allow one person or one group or whatever to really ultimately to have so much of a sway over you that you ignore what the people that you love, are telling you.
Yeah. I think, a big lesson is another problem that he had was he thought everything was owed to him. As soon as he was told, he was the chosen one, it ultimately turned his, that sort of a desire for adventure that we were talking about earlier. It kind of turned more into a desire for power, because that got into his head before he even turned, because I think of when he was brought into the Jedi Council and they didn't give him the rank of master. And he ticked him off, yeah. Right? Yeah. It's like, yeah, if you're, so I guess the lesson is, if you think you're really good at something, even if you are really good at something, or if you feel like you're a good person or you do good things, don't think that anything's owed to you. Don't think that you should have some sort of, whether it's some sort of title or some sort of monetary or social gain. Just do good things because it's the right thing to do. That was his ultimate fall, and the ultimate fall of all of us, is our pride. So I mean, you can literally learn every fundamental lesson there is when you look at his character. But yeah, that's a big one for me.
I would just say, and I think we've kind of gotten at this already, but what just came to mind now was that true full love is giving, not taking. And even though, I wouldn't say his love for Padme wasn't authentic, I mean, he loved her, but it's missing something, because he's like the extents he's going to get this life with her that he wants isn't true love. And that's what made me think of it was in reverse. Like, what is the crowning moment of his life when he becomes his fullest self? It's when he sacrifices his life for his son. Mm-hmm. And it's like, and it's different because, he put his life on the line how many times, right? Sincerely. But I feel like Peter, right? Peter fought for Jesus. Peter started taking ears off. You know what I mean? Like Peter, like he was risking at that moment, but it's when it's going to cost you everything and there's no way out. You're not going to get out of this one. Like if you pick the Emperor up, he's going to fry your, life support system and you're going to die. And we won't get into the whole thing of, unless someone really, 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 really uses the Force really hard and heals you. We're not going to get into that one. But no, but truly, like, to do that in that moment, knowing he's going to die, that's, to me, I always see that as that's the moment when he is his fullest self. And that's what he was always looking for, and finally realizes it at that moment.
Yeah, I would sort of jump from that. And the lesson that I wrote down was that redemption is never too late or too far from someone who is willing to repent and change, because he, lived. I mean, he was Darth Vader for however many years and decades. And yet, he was able to repent and convert back to doing the right thing at the very end, and was able to be redeemed there. And that's just that's a lesson for all of us too, is no matter how far we've, strayed from the faith or strayed from doing the right thing, it's never too late to repent and come back. And that's the beauty of our God, is he's always there waiting. He's never going to force, but he's always there inviting and offering his mercy and his forgiveness to those, even if their entire life they've fallen away and strayed. But if they come back with a repentant heart, redemption there is never too late. So definitely a good character for us to look to for these kind of things. Any final comments or observations that any of you have on Anakin / Darth Vader?
I feel like there's so much still, but
yeah.
I'm looking forward to what our audience, our listeners have to say too about Darth Vader. I'd love to hear what their favorite moments and favorite qualities and lessons are.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's kind of where we'll end this, and listeners, definitely let us know what your thoughts are on Anakin and Darth Vader, and whether you thought he was a good hero and a good villain, what your favorite aspects of the character were, what lessons you've learned from him, how you've connected and related to him. We'd love to hear it all. So you can let us know through various different ways. You can comment on our Facebook page at StarQuest on Facebook.com/StarQuest Media. You can tweet at us at SQPN on Twitter. You can also email us any feedback at starwars@sqpn.com. So definitely we look forward to continuing the conversation through those various mediums. Also, at this point, we'd like to take a moment and thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Star Wars, including this week, Lisa R., George U., Amy M., Connie W., and Robert H. And now is definitely a great time to become a StarQuest patron if you are not already doing so, because thanks to a generous gift from a StarQuest supporter, when you start a new Patreon monthly pledge at sqpn.com/give, the first 3 months will be matched by an equal amount from our donor. So if you become a patron at $10 per month, after 3 months, our donor will give $30 to StarQuest to support all our shows, including this one, making your gift go even further. So if you've been thinking about becoming a StarQuest patron, now is definitely the time to do so. And visit sqpn.com/give today to become a patron. Also, of course, be sure to subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast player if you have not already done so that way you don't miss a single episode when we release them. You can also find us on the SQPN YouTube channel. Just be sure to click the bell to receive notifications of new episodes. And you can find any and all previous episodes of The Secrets of Star Wars by going to sqpn.com/Star Wars. And we will be back in 2 weeks as we continue our character series by taking a deeper look into the very, 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 very old character of Yoda himself. So until next time, Andrew Hermes, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Wars.
Thanks for having me.
Angela Cialana, thanks for joining us this evening as well.
It was a pleasure.
And Mike Creevy, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you guys. Can't wait for the next one.
And once again, I'm Father Andrew Kinstetter. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Star Wars on StarQuest.